Welcome. Welcome, everyone. Dear faculty, staff, students, friends, and colleagues, welcome to this celebration of life of Professor George Annas. My name is Adnan Haider. I serve as the current Dean of the Boston University School of Public Health, and it's my great privilege and honor to welcome you to this celebration of life of George Annas. First, I hope, on behalf of you all, to offer our most sincere condolences to the family for the loss. That is not just their loss, but a loss to our whole community at the School of Public Health, at Boston University, and actually, from my perspective as a professor of global health, for the global community, because we have indeed lost an intellectual, a powerhouse, and a humane individual. It is often said that the greatest contribution academics can make are not by the number of papers they publish or the number of research dollars they get or the number of courses they teach, but rather by the number of people we inspire. And I think by all accounts that I have read about, heard about, and seen, George raised the bar very, very high on all of us. George was the William Fairfield Warren Distinguished Professor at Boston University. He was director of the Center of Law, Ethics, and Human Rights. He taught law, bioethics, and health for over 40 years here at the School of Public Health, and a few extra years at Boston University. 20 or 25 books, 400 plus academic papers, a sentinel book on the rights of patients, starting organizations like Global Lawyers and Physicians. He was indeed an emblem of what we are now calling the convergent work that we promote at Boston University. He was a health lawyer, and he liked to be known as a health lawyer. He often didn't like to be called a bioethicist, it is said. In fact, he was also called a father of patient rights. And that's incredibly important for us to understand. I didn't have the privilege of knowing him too well. I met him only once at a conference, and that was very significant because of the intellectual input he was giving on global bioethics at that time. But I would like to share a few quotes that people sent me. One of his colleagues said, George was a moral leader. He was a man with real values, values he cared about. Another colleague said, actually, George was just a regular guy who taught in jeans and comfortable sweaters and loved Star Trek. And one of his students said, it was overwhelming hope in the face of adversity that he taught me. It is knowing that we can and will continue to protect human rights, even when it feels bleak. That is what this professor gave me. Those are just some of the expressions, not only about his intellect, but his approachable style, his concern for students, his wit, his humor, all that made George Annas what many, many of you knew so well. I think it is incredibly telling that he also allowed schools and faculties to work together, particularly the School of Law, the School of Public Health, the School of Medicine. In fact, the dean of the School of Medicine really wanted to be here today, but she was unable to because of some of her, unfortunately, previous commitments. But she sent a glowing tribute to George, and she actually said that he was the founder of our joint law and School of Public Health program, that he built key institutions here at Boston University and in the field of law, that he was instrumental to the building of the American Society of Law, Medicine, and Ethics, and the law school's only peer-reviewed journal, the American Journal of Law and Medicine. According to her, she could not possibly overstate how important he was to the program, to the field of law, and to the field of health law in particular. I don't think I could have done a better job at describing the impact of George Annas to BU and to the School of Public Health. It is therefore my great privilege that I am fortunate enough to be part of this celebration. I'm also greatly honored that many of you have decided to join us today and that many of you have agreed to say a few words in his honor. I'm first delighted to welcome the Provost of Boston University, Professor Gloria Waters. Professor Waters is a well-known entity here at BU, having served for decades as Dean, as Vice Provost, as a professor in the Sargent College. We are delighted, Provost Waters, that you are here and would welcome some opening comments from you.
Thank you, Adnan. So while this is a celebration, it's certainly, I think, with heavy hearts that we come together today to honor the life and the legacy of Professor George Annis. As evidenced by the turnout that we have here today, I think there's no question that Professor Annis left a really indelible mark on the Boston University community and really on the world at large. His impact was far beyond the walls of this institution. Over the course of his career, Professor Annis's teaching, his writing, and his research was as inspiring as it was influential. And I think you can see from the comments that Adnan made from students and others what a huge impact he had on so many people's lives. He was a prolific writer and a scholar, and he was, as already noted, an incredibly fierce advocate for patients' rights, writing often about the role of the medical and the legal professions and how it was their obligation to protect the dignity and also the most vulnerable among us. And so really, I think, so synergistic with what the Boston University School of Medicine is, what the School of Public Health is, what Boston Medical Center is. I think he was right at home here with his values, and the work that he did was so important to what we were doing. He brought his convictions to the classroom, and I think had an incredible mark on aspiring health practitioners to the complex world of health outside the hospital. And he taught classes at BU's medical school as well as at the School of Public Health, as Adnan said, for more than 40 years. So, and I think as Adnan noted, he was, a person who came before us in terms of thinking about convergent research and all of the things that we are pushing now with interdisciplinary work, with an appointment both in the School of Law and also in the School of Public Health. And he was certainly among the most cited scholars in the school's faculty, and he played this critical role in founding the joint law health program between the two schools, which is really preeminent today and one of the most highly ranked in the nation. As Adnan noted, in recognition of the extraordinary contributions to Boston University that he made, in 2009 he was honored to be a William Fairfield Warren Distinguished Professor, which is really the highest honor that we give to any faculty member here at Boston University. And I think it's notable that he was among the very first of the faculty at Boston University to be given this honor, and so fitting. In everything he did, he brought unshakable moral values and a commitment to empowering the disempowered. And while I didn't have the privilege of working with him or alongside him, I certainly knew of him, seeing him from a distance in his jeans and beard, and just really is such a warm, wonderful person to see. So I think it's really a privilege to work alongside people like that. It's what makes us all be very privileged to be here at Boston University. And I think his work really reminds us that the pursuit of knowledge has to always be paired with the deepest respect for humanity. And that's what he really brought to his work. It wasn't knowledge for knowledge's sake, but he really was very, very focused on humanity and really helping people. So I think in that he's really offered his most valuable lesson to us, the importance of humanity. So as we remember Professor Annis today, I think we really want to think of his legacy and that he continues to inspire us with integrity, to teach with purpose. I think he really taught with purpose, and to advocate fiercely for those whose voices are often not heard. So on behalf of Boston University, I certainly want to thank Professor Annis for a lifetime of service, scholarship, and also especially moral leadership. I think that's something that is so important to us here. And to his loved ones, I offer my sincere condolences. I think his memory is going to live on incredibly well in terms of the work that he's done and the values that he has really instilled in the students that he taught, and I think in all of us here today, the importance of health for all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Provost Waters. Thank you for your support of the work that George Annis did and the continuation of that work through our center and through our department and our school. Provost Waters is a strong supporter of public health. I'm now honored to welcome somebody who needs no introduction to this community, Professor Sandro Galea. Dean Galea was the dean of the school for nearly a decade and really led the school in some of its foundational rise to where it is today. I'm honored that Dean Galea has made time. He is the current dean of the School of Public Health at Washington University in St. Louis, Missouri, and I believe is online. May I request, Sandro, for you to make some reflections?
Thank you, Dean Hyder. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Very good. Thank you for inviting me to join in this celebration of George. I was touched to be invited. Thank you, Dean Hyder, for your hospitality, and thank you, Provost Waters, for your remarks, and thank you to everybody in the room who has gathered to remember and celebrate George. I moved to Boston University 11 years ago. It was in January 1st of 2015. And when I first moved into my first office that I occupied at BU, George came by and gave me a copy of his and Wendy Mariner's Public Health Law, 2nd edition. And I had just moved into my office, and I had no books on my shelf except for George and Wendy's Public Health Law, 2nd edition. There has since been a 3rd edition, which involves other colleagues who I'm sure are in the audience. But this book, Public Health Law, sat on my shelf. It was actually the first book in my office, and for many, many weeks until I eventually settled in, it was the only book in my office at BU. And I feel like, as I thought back on that 11 years ago, in many ways, the fact that George and Wendy's book was the only book on my shelf captured well the outsized intellectual contribution I feel George made, and on a personal note, the influence he had on my thinking. I think at a succinct, simple level, George was the most important intellectual influence on me during my time in Boston. So I went back to my calendar, and during my 10 years at Boston University, I met with George 120 times in my office. In those meetings, we did a little business, but to be honest, not very much. Mostly, in each of those hour-long meetings, we talked about living. We talked about living in a principled way, committed to a fair, ethical vision of how to be part of the business of generating a healthier world for all. We talked about the virtues of self-restraint and of compassion in a time when the world often felt like it was on fire. And we talked about how we inhabit the responsibility that I think we both felt to be part of the business of creating a world where everybody lives longer, healthier lives. You know, over the years, I had the privilege of writing a few papers with George, and in doing all that, I learned from him both about how to write, but also how to think deeply about what it means to be human and what it means to be in the business of caring for the health of the public. You know, I suppose George left me with the best gift he could ever leave me with, and I suspect he would actually like this. George ultimately taught me, and I did my very best to learn from him. George, wherever you are, thank you. Thank you all for being here.
Carrying on that tradition, I am also deeply honored to welcome Dean Robert Meenan back to the School of Public Health today. Dean Meenan, you were Sandro's predecessor, and you led the school for nearly 22 years. So, of course, you knew George well. And we are honored that you've returned today to mark this special day and special honor. I'd like to welcome you here for your reflections.
Thank you. It's interesting to follow up Sandro, who became George's student in a way. I was actually officially George's student. My first major connection with him was taking health law, Introduction to Health Law from George and Leonard. And it was a fascinating experience. I was professor in the medical school, taking part-time MBA, and I found out I could take that course for credit. So I said, sure. And it really set up a surprising plot twist where maybe 5 or 6 years after that course, I became the dean, and George and Leonard were my faculty members. George was a department chair. And Leonard will remember this, that he gave me a very good grade on the final exam of that course. George not so much, which I called to his attention. But Sandra gave a sense of it. Spending 22 years working with George was a remarkable experience. He was so smart and so focused, despite his worldwide reputation and his incredible scholarly output. He was a remarkable citizen of the school, if you will. He really cared about how the school did. And anytime I have a conversation with George, it was easy because I was looking for what was best for the school. George was on the same wavelength. And you don't often see somebody with that sort of reputation being a hands-on teacher, being so devoted to the institution that he spent time in, because they could always pack up and leave and go to someplace else. So I want to talk about George's impact on the school. And I know many people today will talk quite appropriately about his international standing as a scholar and his seminal contributions to the field of patient rights. But I really want to comment on his equally remarkable contributions to the School of Public Health. This is very parochial, but I think it's something that is worth highlighting. So he was critical to the School of Public Health. He was here at the beginning of the school. He was here through the years of growth. And I say without any problem that he was probably more important to the school than any of the 3 deans that he worked so closely with during the time that he was here. And the reason was that he could help us move from a small department in the medical school to becoming a freestanding school, to becoming a top 10 school of public health. And the reason for that, quite frankly, as people have mentioned already, is that George had an academic gravitas because of his scholarly contributions, his intellectual standing, and his international reputation. And that gravitas is priceless currency in academia. And I used it shamelessly. And having George on the faculty served as a valuable way for me to work with the medical school, with the university, which you all know is not always easy and seamless. But it helped immensely to have somebody of George's stature on the faculty. And he and his whole team, I see the photos going through here, had involvement with multiple schools. They were critical in the socio-medical sciences department that taught the medical students. They were always in demand, and they were teaching at the law school. They were always sought for the honors programs at the College of Arts and Sciences. And as Gloria has mentioned, most tellingly, when they set up the Warren Distinguished Professors Program, George was one of the first 2 to be named. Okay, and the other one was an outstanding molecular biologist who soon thereafter decamped to MIT, I do believe. Okay, George stayed. All right, and having that designation, having somebody with George's gravitas, was absolutely critical in ways that you can't quite measure, but trust me, I just knew it was there. So his contributions to health law scholarship are impressive and will never be forgotten. And I hope that his contributions to the creation and the development and success of the School of Public Health were also immense, and I hope will likewise not be forgotten. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean Meenan, for reflecting on the academic gravitas that George brought and that you used very well to grow the school. It's now my honor to welcome my colleague, Professor Michael Stein. Professor Stein is the chair of the Department of Health Law, Policy and Management, in which, of course, George resided. And I'm sure that, Michael, you got to know him quite well in the decade that you've been here. I'll also request Michael to take over my MC responsibilities henceforth while I'm able to sit there and listen to all of you. So, Michael, welcome.
Good afternoon. Thanks for being here. So I'll start with a remembrance, although I'm officially MC, until about 4 o'clock, and then I'll have to lean over, and until about 4 o'clock, and then others will take over, and after the planned remembrances, obviously the audience can stand up and speak, and that will continue the program. So I prepared for saying a few words about George the way any careful academic would. I went to YouTube and watched a bunch of his old comedy improv routines. For those of you who didn't know, he did comedy, and so much for dashing his gravitas. Sorry, Dean Meenan. There he was, in his familiar jeans and a black long-sleeve shirt, making jokes about lawyers, the medical world, and silly government or institutional policies. It seemed appropriate, in keeping with what I imagine George's wishes would be for this event, to share a few of my favorite routines with you. So, regarding the World Health Organization, George claimed that they said we needed new names for diseases, and because some constituencies were extremely upset with the current names, pigs were extremely upset with swine flu. Lou Gehrig's disease, he thought, should be called the Ice Bucket Challenge disease. Heart attacks should be heart embraces. Necrophilia should be called endless love syndrome. In one of his best routines, George offered us the top 3 American scenarios for the end of the world: nuclear war, climate change, and hair loss. The Homeland Security Department had recently pronounced its doctrine of all hazards preparedness, and the department had told Americans at that point to prepare for these 3 scenarios by buying an extra can of tuna fish and some powdered milk whenever you went to the supermarket. So they had not announced, of course, what you were supposed to do with those, so George had figured it out that what to do. In the case of nuclear attack, you were to take your cans of tuna fish, according to George, line them up to build a wall, duck behind it, and remain there for 30 days. Assuming the radiation would be absorbed by the tuna. In the event of a biological attack, you were to open 2 cans of tuna and hope that the poisonous microbes would be attracted to the fish, and then leap into the can, saving you. In the event of hair loss, you needed to mix the tuna and the powdered milk into a paste and apply it twice daily to your scalp for the rest of your life. His routines were joyful, whether you thought they were funny or not. He liked to make people laugh. He liked to make himself laugh. He was an absurdist, which meant telling things about the world that were ridiculous but true. Former Secretary of Defense Robert Gates worried that he was too old and too short for the job, and George suggested to Gates, get over it, have some pride in yourself. George, as a performer, was extroverted and ironic, not the academic paradigm. Still, I believe what George was asking himself when speaking to every one of us, to every academic, was, is that guy stupid? Is he really profound, or is he just messing with me? At least that's what I often felt when I was talking to him. George gave me one physical gift over the years, and that was a book called Filthy Lucre. It was about money, a topic George was loath to discuss, and also about art, which he knew I would always discuss with him. But here was this book that he somehow had associated with me, someone who had to have occasional money talks with him. So was he saying to me as he handed over the book, which still sits on my desk, Michael, these discussions of money are really stupid? Or was he saying that our conversations about money and the future of the center are really profound? Or was he just messing with me? I think the last, which is fine by me, and I only wish he was around to mess with me some more. So, the first remembrance after this is Leonard. Leonard, ready?
So he would love being quoted in his comedy routines. If there was anything else that he wanted said about him, that would probably be the most important thing to him. So I met George in the summer of 1973 at the Center for Law and Health Sciences at the law school. So 1973 was like a really long time ago. Right? And what is difficult to remember is sort of the frothiness at the time, and by that I mean we've had the laws passed to enforce civil rights, that there was the Vietnam War was just coming to an end. 6 months before I met George, the Supreme Court decided Roe v. Wade, that the Supreme Court actually existed to champion individual rights and to help create them instead of destroying them. So there was like a sense of optimism and a sense that things could change, and it did really start with the civil rights movement, I think, which was successful. There was the Voting Rights Act that was passed only 7 years before we met, and is now about to go away with the Supreme Court. But I think that you have to think that when you try to establish rights and try to make social change, you need to consider the era. And the era was one in which was very exciting and very challenging. To give you an example of how long ago 1973 was, that it wasn't for 4 years that Harvard would admit women to the Harvard College, that things were pretty different. So yeah, it was an era really of shifting power dynamics, that black people were gaining power, women were gaining power. And there was a series of rights. The ACLU had a series of rights books: the rights of prisoners, the rights of suspects, the rights of the mentally ill, as they called it. That was their language, the mentally ill. And when George went to the ACLU and said, you should do a book on the rights of patients, they asked why. They said, patients aren't like prisoners. They're not like people who are disabled or something. They're just people who are sick. They go to the hospital, doctors take care of them, and everything is fine. And George said, well, not really. That there's really more to it than that. The issue of the rights of patients and the rights of people within the healthcare system was evolving at that time. And one of the major contributions was the book Our Bodies, Ourselves. And Judy Norsigian is here. And that was a book that was probably as influential as Dr. Spock's Baby Care book in terms of lay people reading it, learning a lot about their bodies and learning a lot about their rights. In the original book at the end, there's even a chapter on capitalism in medicine, which of course we wouldn't talk about today. But it was the Women's Health Book Collective, Right with the Fist, and it was involved with rights. George's book was of the same era, right, and with the same idea. So once upon a time, when people got sick, they actually stayed in the hospital. That people with like appendicitis might be in the hospital for 3 or 4 days, instead of having someone take out their appendix in front of the hospital and send them home. It was, and so when George wrote his first book, it was about the rights of hospital patients, with the sense that people in the hospital were at particular risk. His second book was called The Rights of Patients. which the second edition, which was because he understood the nature of the physician-patient relationship, and the empowerment problems were not because of institutionalization, but were because really of paternalism and the lack of willingness to share responsibility in making healthcare decisions. In his book, The Rights of Patients, there was a chapter on informed consent. He wrote about that topic a lot. It was actually controversial at the time. We probably, again, it's hard to think, how can informed consent be controversial? But there was a real opposition by many doctors to the concept. They said there were two things. One is that the patients were too dumb to understand this stuff, and the second, that if they did understand it, they might not get the treatment that they needed because they would refuse. And that, of course, was not the problem with the doctrine. It was the purpose of the doctrine for people to do it. But to see how controversial it was then and how uncontroversial it is now shows you about the nature of social progress in the doctor-patient relationship. There's a section on medical records back in 1973. It was impossible for patients to get their medical records. George and I once spent 6 months getting medical records for somebody from what was then BI. And it was weird because it was their stuff, right? It was like, there's nothing new. It's their medical records. They know that they're sick. Couldn't get them. And now, of course, when you go see the doctor, by the time you get home, you have the raw lab results, as well as doctor's notes. You often have the lab results before your doctor has the lab results. So think of the radical change in the nature of that. And so when George, a couple of years, said to me, he was thinking about doing a final edition of The Rights of Patients. I said to him, well, what would you write about? That if you go down the list of things he discussed in The Rights of Patients, 75, this is the original book, by the way. You could have bought it for $250 at the time. If you go down the list of things that he cared about and things that he advocated for, a lot of it's been resolved. That, and while it's important to always enforce rights, that what's needed is the recognition of those rights, and those rights had really been recognized over the course of his life. In a sense, I was telling him, you should just take the win, and not really go on with it. One of the things I used to tell Bob Meenan, I used to discuss with Bob Meenan, by the way, the lesson from Bob's talk is that you should always give an A to the person who's going to be your dean 5 years later. I think I just violated the student's privacy law, actually. So one of the things about George is that he was a convener. His first book was really a popular book, The Rights of Hospital Patients, which is not the way to enter academia, that popularizations are not thought well of, but it has already been said, he was out there to teach people about stuff. He was out there to be practical, and he was out there to be helpful, not to be theoretical or academic. It's not to say that he wasn't an academic, a real academic too, as has been described by his accomplishments already. When he received the William Fairfield Distinguished Professorship, and was one of the first two, I remember Bob Brown saying it was a no-brainer. That there are a lot of people at this university who were smart, but his was clearly deserved. There were like many former students who have actually written to me since George's death, also since Michael Grodin's death, to talk about what they meant to him. And this is one student who wrote to me, he said, "Despite my resistance, I was taught to be a better thinker, a clearer writer, and a stronger advocate. I've been lucky to apply these skills to public health work around the world and in my home community." If you're a teacher, that's what you want to hear, right? That's said that, it's what your students do, which is your greatest legacy. I have to say that it's impossible to say how much George's colleagueship, mentorship, and deep friendship meant to me for 52 years. I was going to start by saying that when I first met George, it was a little, I didn't know who he was. I was hired first at the School of Law. He was hired second, which always really annoyed him. All I knew about him is that he was a guy with 3 Harvard degrees, and I figured, oh no, this is like really high risk for obnoxiousness. This is going to be tough. And then I met him, and he was like this furry guy wearing jeans and a polo shirt and sneakers. There were no running shoes back then. Sneakers, and I thought, this is better. This will be fine. And of course, it was. So meeting George was really what I would say is the second luckiest day of my life. It really changed my life. My wife, Barbara Katz, is here, and she will tell you what the first luckiest day of my life was. So thank you for the opportunity to discuss this, and I look forward to hearing your stories when we have some time to chat. Thank you.
Thank you, Leonard. Emerita Professor Wendy Mariner.
Yes, I'm Wendy Mariner, and I am here to express my gratitude for George's wisdom, his integrity, his inspiration, and his generosity, especially to me. I was really excited when I joined BU. There was George for legal rights. There was Michael Grodin for the right thing, regardless of the law. And there was Leonard, who gave us a dose of reality. And I didn't have to teach civil procedure. So everybody knows how good that is. Now, I'd heard George could be gruff. He didn't suffer fools lightly. But it turns out he was funny. He really wasn't critical of people, only bad ideas. And if he argued with you, it was a sign of respect. He believed you could engage with his ideas intelligently and defend your own. And if you didn't, he believed you could rethink your position. George was also a rarity, especially in academia. He was a brilliant scholar, an intellectual pioneer, and a man with no ego. I mean, he fought fiercely for human rights, and you hear about that a lot, but never for himself. And I think he had that self-confidence that didn't need to show off. It didn't need stroking. And I also think that it was largely because his wife, Mary, and his kids, Katie and David, strengthened that core sense of security. Family always came first. And George created another family here. I mean, everybody was an equal member. He set the tone. All the faculty and staff ate lunch together every day, And it always devolved into a debate over genomic therapies, Guantanamo, ERISA, whatever case was happening. I made sure ERISA got in there. And everybody volunteered to comment on each other's work. And they didn't expect any authorship. Only at the medical school would anybody get that. I mean, George's typical comments on my drafts were, "This reads like a boring law review. You need a metaphor." But George was really the boss in another sense. In the sense he took responsibility for the department and for mentoring all the faculty and staff. He created opportunities for us. And even I often questioned him on where are we going to get the budget for this project or that project. And he said, "Don't worry about it. I'll take care of it." And he always did. Except it was sometimes hard for grants. And I recall he and Fran Miller once went to a meeting with Kellogg Foundation representatives about a grant for the health law program. Oh, the Ford Foundation? He lied to me. Oh, okay. Well, Fran knows, because she was there. And Kellogg, the Ford folks said, "Lawyers don't need funding. Forget about it." I'm glad that's not entirely true anymore, but there can be a catch. And sometimes funders would really rather fund projects that promise results they prefer. George would never make that promise. He never did, despite university disappointment at times. But meanwhile, George was frighteningly prolific, right? He wrote book after book while the rest of us were still researching a single article. He had breakthrough insights that sparked change. He was a remarkable advocate for women's rights. Women like Nancy Cruzan, Terry Schiavo, Kathy Shine, all women protected by the Affordable Care Act. And his writing was imaginative and memorable. He used metaphors that still resonate, like elephants in mouse holes, genes as your future diary, which should be kept private, ecology instead of war as a metaphor for medicine, and especially relevant today, I think, his statue of security representing terrorism as a pretext for taking away your liberty. Still, George believed in teaching as the primary job of a faculty member, and before new faculty here could actually teach their own course, they had to sit in our department, on other courses for a full semester. Everybody's nodding their heads, right? So you could see how to generate critical thinking with a bit of humor. And for many years, George taught about the patient-physician relationship with the 12 laws of the Boy Scout Code. Anybody remember this? George argued that the first 6 of these are what the patient wants the doctor to be: trustworthy, loyal, helpful, friendly, courteous, and kind. The other 6 are what the doctor wants the patient to be: obedient, cheerful, thrifty, brave, clean, and reverent. George did tell some great jokes, if you don't count his stand-up comedy routines. But I knew him as a serious student of the law, of ethics, of human rights, and a consummate advocate of all 3, and for his family, his friends, colleagues, and students and anyone in need of help. We miss you, my friend. We still need your wisdom. Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy. Next, Professor Sandra Crosby, Professor of Medicine and Health Law Policy Management.
So my name is Sandra Crosby. It's very hard to be here today, and I will always cherish George and how he came to be one of my closest friends and colleagues over the last 25 years. His loyalty and compassion ran deep, as you've been hearing from other speakers today. He had a moral compass that he generously shared through so many countless long discussions about navigating the thorny ethical, human rights issues of the day, often on the red couch in the center. If only that place had a tape recorder. We shared a love of the human rights field, and we taught the SPH course on health and human rights together for the last number of years. He believed that human rights were the foundation, the bedrock of our shared humanity. And this has really served as a guiding principle in my work. He has been my most important academic mentor, and he has really helped steer my journey through a career in medicine, ethics, and human rights. He, has really taught me and embodied the principle and the sacred obligation of doctors and lawyers working together to uphold and protect human rights of all people. George supported me through my utter despair and horror during the COVID-19 pandemic when I was a physician on the inpatient service in 2020 on the front lines. And he spoke with me every day, and he was able to channel that experience into a real-time analysis on the ethics of rationing ventilators and crisis standards of care, which really helped sustain me through that time. And when I became very ill with COVID, he checked in on me every single day. We've done so many human rights projects over the years. I think one of the most fun ones that we did is we took a School of Public Health class to McAllen, Texas, on the border, to witness firsthand the harsh realities faced by migrants who were escaping persecution and coming over the border. The trip was profoundly impactful and would not have happened without George. There were so many obstacles to taking students on this course, and I'm sure there are people, faculty here in the school who can attest to that. George, in his typical fashion in Texas, dived into the local cuisine, and I still just remember him so vividly eating crunchy grasshoppers. And by the way, he said they were delicious. George and I worked on projects related to Nuremberg, and he was a great teacher for me on the Nuremberg trials. And in fact, we both delivered plenaries on the 70th anniversary of the doctor's trial, which was in 2022, which I remember so fondly in Nuremberg. That was the last international conference that we attended together. And I was so grateful that David, George's son, and Karina, and Mary, George's wife, were also at the conference. And we were just like family. I will never forget that. George, with all the extraordinary accomplishments you've heard about today, was also a scholar on torture, which is my field. Following 9/11, which is now almost 25 years ago, George assumed a national leadership role in opposing U.S. practices such as the rendition, detention, and interrogation program, which was, as you know, a covert CIA operation that involved disappearances, renditions, extrajudicial detentions and torture of terrorism suspects. He provided rigorous analysis that we use now on how doctors and lawyers work together in the CIA to rationalize and sanitize torture and to provide legal immunity to perpetrators. Together, we worked with the Department of Defense and the Pentagon, hosted meetings and international workshops to brainstorm solutions to this problem. And this work, this important work, continues at Guantanamo Bay, again, now almost 25 years later. And George was instrumental in not just mentoring me, but providing a vision on what needed to be done. We've talked about people have talked about George's humanity. George's humanity through compassion for vulnerable humans on a personal level can't be overstated. He supported classes on English and civics for disabled refugees in the School of Public Health in the center that were taught by his incredible wife, Mary Annis. But he was so humble, no ego. So was Mary, never taking credit for this important initiative. I kept wanting to publicize it, write about this great work they were doing, and he just, didn't think it was necessary. It was just, doing his job. And one student in the class from an African country in conflict who didn't speak English, suffered from torture, and was having a really hard time getting her citizenship and learning English. And George personally drove her in his car in the rain to a free legal clinic at the Boston Public Library so she could get legal assistance. He never spoke about that deed. I heard about it elsewhere. Again, George just understated his incredible humanity. And this woman was actually granted citizenship 2 days after George's death. George was a voracious reader, as everyone knows, and we had this lovely informal book club where we discussed books that he usually passed off to me after reading them first. And this was such a joyful exercise. We ranged from weighty tomes about Nuremberg, but one of our favorites was talking about Stephen King books. He liked those. And Professor Stein talked about George doing stand-up later in his career. I loved George's stand-up, and it also taught me an important lesson about bringing humor into serious public health issues and how important that is, like death and dying, aging, and pandemics. And that is a lesson I've taken with me. We taught our last class, spring semester of 2025, and human rights, as everybody knows, are under threat for so many populations right now. And George just encouraged me to stay optimistic when I was down. And a lasting lesson he would always say to me is that, we can't solve this, we can't do everything, but we can all do something in our daily lives, no matter how small, to uphold human rights. And I really hope to carry that legacy on when I continue with teaching the class. I do miss George terribly. Again, I can't overstate what an incredible colleague and friend he is, and I am so thankful to his family, Katie, Matt, Anna, David, Karina here today for sharing George with us. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Liz McCuskey, current director of the Center for Health Law, Ethics, and Human Rights. It's my pleasure to introduce David Rosenblum.
Oh, great. You're going to do it.
Professor of Health Law Policy and Management Emeritus.
Great, wonderful. Thank you.
George had views. He could take outrageous into a 17-syllable word. And when he did, you knew that you were about to hear the latest outrage of injustice or stupidity that he had seen. And we would often laugh at the absurdities that he exposed. And at other times, we would also laugh because the only option was to cry. George was a founder, as you have heard, of the School of Public Health. And he played a really critical role in establishing the values of the school, our culture of high academic and ethical standards, our caring for each other, and our focus on real-world problems of injustice and unethical behavior. For a few years, I played a role in recruiting new faculty to the school. And I would always ask a visitor how he compared what he was seeing here at the School of Public Health with what he or she was seeing in the other places they were visiting. And all of them sort of said the same thing, which was something like, well, you guys seem to really like each other. And then they would regale me with tales of horror about either their own schools or places that they'd visited. We do respect and like each other around here. And George and the other founders laid the foundation and built it for us on those values. He led by example, as we've heard here today. He recruited extraordinarily talented advocates, teachers. Leonard, Wendy, Michael, Winnie, and now Nicole, Sonia, Michael, and Liz, all outstanding examples of the values that he built us. For most of our life as a school, all of our students in the MPH program took a full semester of health law and ethics and a full semester of health policy. I thought our focus on health law and ethics was really what distinguished us from many other schools and put us ahead. But I had known George for a very, very long time, but never really got to work with him on a day-to-day basis until the powers that be decided to do a curriculum reform and take us from 6 core courses to 4. So health law and ethics and health policy had to be put together in one course. Let me just say that shoving 15 pounds of, shall we say, content into a 5-pound bag is not easy, and it isn't fun. But George, as the chair of health policy, and I, as the interim ad infinitum chair of health policy, decided we had to do something. And none of us were happy. For the first several years, this new monster was team taught, so the students would at least understand that somebody who knew something about law was teaching something, and somebody who knew something about policy was also teaching. There was one other nasty piece of business that George and I had to do together, and that was to merge the 2 departments. That actually turned out to be easier than I thought it was going to be. Because one day I suggested to George that we call it Health Law, Policy, and Management. And that was fine with him. And at the end of it all, we still liked each other. I could end this by saying, George, rest in peace. But we know that George did not much rest. And he certainly did not feel that there was a pillow of peace that he could lay down on. So instead, in the Jewish tradition, when we are mourning a person, we often say, may his memory be a blessing. It's an active prayer. It means that those of us who are living are comforted, but also challenged to continue the person's work. George, Zikrona Livkava, may your memory be a blessing.
We now get to hear from Christy Hager, JD MPH extraordinaire, former U.S. DHHS New England Regional Director, Associate Professor at UMass Chan Medical School, Senior Advisor to the Mass Health Commonwealth of Massachusetts.
I am humbled to be speaking today and deeply, deeply honored and proud to be among the generations of students whom George continues to inspire in dedication to health law and human rights. I had the immense privilege of being George's student, advisee, mentee, and colleague since I first met him at the New England Journal of Medicine almost 40 years ago. I had just been hired by Dr. Marcia Angel shortly after I graduated from college to be her editorial assistant, having warned her that I was holding back my applications to law school for just 1 year in order to work here. So a couple of weeks later, Professor Annis came in to deliver his latest manuscript, which would be one of so many published in the journal, even 5 years before his legal issues in medicine column would appear. And Marcia introduced me to George and said, Chris, you're interested in law and medicine. You should take a look at the health law course that George teaches at BU. So the next day, I called the school, probably on a rotary phone, to register as a guest student so that I could take this health law course. I was terrifyingly intimidated and absolutely hooked on health law from that very first class where George and Leonard tag-teamed my introduction to this area of study that I hadn't even contemplated. And that started my path to study for my MPH part-time at BU with George's sage advice all along the way. He was always open, whether in or out of the classroom, to sharing his wisdom about the deeply individual and personal and patient-centered impact that the latest news item may hold before it even occurred to anyone. It was like every lecture or conversation with George was an aha moment that left us thinking and reflecting and expanding our perspective. He taught us to improve, challenge, and hold accountable the institutions, the systems, the structures, the government agencies, public and private healthcare, places in the field where we might go. And when I graduated from the School of Public Health, I was eager to get to law school and hurry up and be what I wanted to be when I grew up. And George offered much advice about schools based on their respective faculties, all of whom he, of course, knew. And given my interest in a school with an affiliated medical school, not in Boston, but not too far away, Jay Healy and UConn were very strong recommendations. And if not for this great idea of George's, I wouldn't have had the very special opportunity to work with Jay at the medical school there until his death at the end of my first year. It was clear why Jay had been such a favorite of George's. And unsure whether to even remain at UConn, I spent that summer interning back at the health law department to review and give feedback to George on his writing. But he wrote manuscripts and public comments on proposed federal regulations on human subjects research way faster than I could read them. So I'm not sure how helpful I was to him that summer, but I sure learned a lot. And in the fall, with George's counsel, I did return to UConn, where I met my fellow law student and now husband, Royal. And I've always been mindful that if not for George's great idea, there would have been no UConn, no Royal, no daughter Olivia now. and how different my life and work would have been without him as such an anchor. So here's where I was going to cite the Boy Scout Promise 12 laws, Wendy, thank you. Since Wendy's already listed them for us, I will just highlight the 12th of them, which was reverent. So that meant George was about 11 and a half for the 12. And I just want to end by thanking you, Katie, Matt, Anna, David, and Karina for sharing George with us. And thank you, George, for your well-placed irreverence, wisdom, humor, and your great ideas.
I'm going to invite David and Katie Annis to come up and join us.
Thank you so much for all the kind words, and it was really nice listening to some of those memories. And I don't really have anything prepared right here. I'm going to share one story. It's kind of a interesting one because I guess growing up with I called Papa, growing up with George, and it's just an interesting experience you don't really appreciate until you get older. But when you're a kid and you're being dragged around to conferences and things like that, and it's just it's such a funny thing. So there's a story my cousin Mike reminded me about a little while ago, and there was this. I don't know, to this day I don't even know what exactly it was, but it was some bioethics retreat, and it was in Minnesota, in this place called Lutzen, which I think might be around. I don't know. I think it's pretty high up, like near Duluth, and it was this. I don't know exactly what was going on, but there was this point where we were like just kind of watching what was going on, and we were trying to do our own thing outside and stuff like that, but we were kind of like just interested in what was going on. And some big debate was going on, and what it was. So someone was speaking, and so Papa was sitting there and listening to the guy, and apparently did not agree with anything the person said, and when the person and while the guy was speaking, he took his paper, whatever was in front of him, crumpled it up in his little ball, walked to the door, and just threw it in the garbage. So Michael was saying to me, he's like, "That's how I learned that this is how the academic disagrees with someone at a conference." But I don't know. There's so many like little funny stories like that. But it just obviously is, we all miss him greatly, and I'm gonna let my dear sister say a few words.
Just like David said, I just want to thank everyone for your memories. And I want you all to know how much this place meant to him. Like Wendy said, it wasn't a family. And, there are people that we've lost from this family, Norm and Michael Groden, and they are missed. And Papa will be with them now, and we'll all miss all of them. It's really rare for someone to spend their whole career in one place, even for his generation. And he just loved it here, but especially being a teacher. And it's just so important, the work that all of you do, but also the little butterflies of students that go out into the world to do the work. That's what was most important to him. I'm just going to do like 2 small little stories that will make me smile and not cry. So he was a very, very important person. And, Dean Meaden said, he had gravitas. That's all true. But at home, like, some weird quirks, One that I never really understood was he didn't like to pick up the phone himself to get someone on the phone. And I don't mean like the cell phones, he was better later. But like, he would bark in the house, "Get Leonard on the phone, get Wendy on the phone." And I'm sitting here like, what are we in the bunkers? And like, during the Blitz? Are you Churchill? Like, what's going on here? The phone's right there. And Mom and I would roll our eyes and get whoever on the phone. Get Michael on the phone. So, I don't know. He had those little picadillos, and it was funny. But I want you all to know how important you all were to my mother as well. especially because you willingly and knowingly or not were part of like the biggest day of our lives, which every year was April Fool's Day. And we really worked hard on those April Fool's jokes. And we got him every time. And he loved getting nabbed by us. And this past year after Mom died, I thought, well, should I do it? I don't know, I think, Matt, I think you said no. It's just too mean. Don't do it. And I think Anna said, no, she has to. Graham would be proud of her. So I did. And I might tell some of you later what it was, but he fell for it. It was later in the day, and he said, damn it, Catherine, I had my guard up this morning, but as the day went on, I just stopped thinking about it, and I got him. We had a very good laugh about that one. So just want to say one more thing. When we said goodbye to him, he said, I've had a great life. And I just want to thank all of you, because that was a big part of what made his life great. And you all did that, and I just want to thank all of you and talk about what Professor Rosenblum said with his prayer, that don't forget that he did a lot of work. And we all have to keep doing that work. And I hope we all do. Thank you.
So let's shift the program schedule just a little bit and maybe do two things at the same time. Invite folks to share remarks, emceed by Gary Cohen, and also please have some snacks, which are there for you and part of George's tradition of making sure everyone was fed, both intellectually and with sustenance. Gary Jones. Fran.
I just wanted to get together something briefly said. I think it was on Nathan. He said he was very smart. Sorry. And
Fran, take the mic. We're going to have people on Zoom hear you. I'm
Oh,
so sorry.
for posterity, Fran.
I think Bob Meenan said that George was very smart. And Wendy was talking about his self-confidence. And I was going to say, damn straight he was smart. We were once talking about something, and he just out of the blue said, well, I came in number 1 in the Mass Bar exam when I took it. And I looked at him and I said, I've never heard that anybody, I didn't know they ranked them. But he got a special letter because he got the highest grade in the Mass Bar, which is phenomenal. I said, okay, I give. I didn't get a letter like that. So, I mean, he really was very, very smart. And David, now I've blown it, shown my age. Yes, I did know George for 50 years. Oh, I know what it was. When you said he liked it, when you thought you might have a fight over this last, consolidation of the department. George and I wrote an article, a law review article together one time. And let me tell you, it was 50-50, and it was 50-50 arguing about every word. But I think we came up with a good piece. But we got to the end, we said, okay, whose name's going first? And George goes, well, A comes before M. And I said, nothing doing. We're flipping a coin. He flipped a coin, and damn it, he won.
That was wonderful, Fran. My name is Judy Norsegian. I was mentioned earlier by Leonard. And I have been filled with so many memories and emotions listening to everyone today. My relationship with George goes back more than half a century, actually. And the person in Our Bodies, Our Cells who knew George before I did was Norma Swenson, who passed away in May at the age of 93. And Norma and I used to have so many conversations about the things that George and Leonard, and actually many other professors here, but I won't get into a long discussion about that, many of the things they taught us. And though his legacy here and in this area is so profound, we all have to remember that because of his role, not just in the writing and in the dissemination of Our Bodies, Our Cells, but in our advocacy work over more than 5 decades, George and you, Leonard, too, especially, have had such a profound impact on women's health, our sense of our rights, what we're capable of doing, of the women's health movement, and students who've come in and out of this world through Our Bodies, Ourselves, and through academia in the Boston area. You will not begin to recount and summarize adequately the impact that's had. And what all of your remarks have left me with today is thinking about how can I make sure that this legacy lives on in all the ways that it must, especially now. You know, and George was influential in Katie Ennis becoming a chair of the board of Our Bodies, Ourselves at one point. David, you were on that trip to Japan when I was there with my daughter, Kira, and George was a speaker, and Irv was a speaker, and I had this recollection of what it must feel like to be a little girl and a little boy dragged by your parents into a country that you've never been to before. And I think that there are many ways in which George has taught so many of us about how to live our lives, how to stand up for human rights, and how to be there for other people and causes that are so important. And I know I'm going to think about ways to make sure this legacy lives on, and I hope all of you do as well. And I'm speaking really for all of us at Our Bodies, Ourselves, which is, you know, now got a permanent home at Suffolk University, thanks to you, Leonard, in many ways. And we're going to see this work continue in so many nonprofit arenas. When we've got scholar activists like George behind us and their wisdom and their words guiding us, I think we can make this happen. Thank you, all of you.
Amazing, thank you. And so also, speaking of legacy, while we have the technology, I think we have one of George's very recent students on Zoom who's going to share.
Hi, everyone. So I'm Hannah Jacobson. I'm a recent graduate of the School of Public Health. When looking at public health programs, I really looked for professors who practiced what they preached, and that is George to a T. As a student, I learned a tremendous amount of information from Professor Annis, both about health policy and the world at large. However, I feel as though I learned a lot from him as one of his teaching assistants for the health policy and law introductory class. We would meet before class as a team to not only talk about the class itself and the students' needs, but we would inevitably end up talking about world events, health policy, and our day-to-day lives. And Professor Annis really made sure that his students had a home at the health policy and law office. He always said we could come to his red couch right near his office and talk whenever we needed to. I feel as though Professor Annis's teachings have really, I feel like they've stuck with me post-graduation. Sometimes I even find myself saying at work, George would really hate this. And I will forever be indebted to Professor Annis for his mentorship, and I genuinely do not know where I would be today without his guidance. And to his family and friends, I'm deeply sorry for your loss, and we are here for you during this difficult time.
Thank you. And so with the embodiment of his legacy for many years to come, let's convene stories around the sandwiches and cookies, and we'll close the formal part and begin the informal part, which I think is also true to how George liked to operate. So thank you all, and please eat.